Hello everyone, I'm Lianne Lorraine and welcome to Lectures with Lianne. We're here today on the second Friday of the month at 4:00 p.m. at Fred Hess Community Park, where we meet every month for a lecture with Lianne. Today we're going to be joined by Dr. Eric Haseltine and Dr. Chris Gilbert, and we are going to be exploring the subject of UFO phenomenon.
I'm a neuroscientist by training, that's brain research. I'm currently the chairman of the board of the U.S. Technology Leadership Council. Before that, I worked at Disney designing toys. And before that, I was the chief technology officer of the U.S. intelligence community. I was the associate director of national intelligence, which oversees the whole intelligence community. And my job was to oversee all the technology. Before that, I was at NSA. I was the associate director there. And that's probably the most relevant. That's what got me into this A&E series, Alien Files Reopened. It was a TV show. I was one of the cast members, I guess you could say, that aired last year. And that led to this book. Dr. Chris.
And I'm Dr. Chris Gilbert. I'm a physician. I'm also a writer for Psychology Today, a writer with Eric. We wrote several books together. I'm also the medical news commentator on Coast to Coast AM. I was working for Doctors Without Borders for a lot of years with missions in Mozambique, in Mauritania, in China, and in Sri Lanka. And I was in private practice doing holistic alternative medicine for a few years in France, Paris, France. You can hear my French accent. I'm going to try to articulate more. And also in Torrance, I was with Dr. Jocelyn Bailey, who is here today also. So anyways, nice to see you all here. And nice to see some fellow physicians here also. Yeah. And we're going to start.
Yes, let's get started. So the title of our book is The New Science of UFOs. So why did we write this book? One of the things I learned as an intelligence officer is to respect the problem. And we have seen, and I saw this when I was in the government, that people don't take this subject seriously in the sense that you don't get really hardcore scientists taking a truly objective look at it. So there's a real gap there. And so we decided to step in and fill that gap. And we came at it objective. We didn't believe, we didn't not believe. And so what you're going to see, if you aren't a scientist, is how a scientist thinks about a problem. And it's exactly the same as an intelligence analyst, which is you surface all the possibilities, you weigh the evidence for and against each one, and in the end you come to a conclusion about, given uncertainty, what is most likely. And so that is why we wrote this book. And we call it The New Science of UFOs.
And we have new insights into an old mystery. And we're just coming back from an adventure ourselves into China, next to China Lake. And we saw a lot of people, and some people told us about UFOs, and some people told us and showed us videos of what they filmed of their UFOs. Some people didn't sleep at night, and they filmed at 4 a.m. and they saw some fantastic stuff. So this is our outfit. We're in a adventurous outfit.
The first sighting was actually in San Pedro, where they saw lights in the sky and they actually thought the Japanese were attacking. And anti-aircraft lit up, the whole sky lit up, and that's actually what led to the movie 1942. That was really the very first sighting of what we would call a UFO. But much more recently, one of the more prominent ones was in 1979. A teenager here in RPV saw this form on the left. It was a chevron about 300 feet across. It was shaped kind of like a triangle with a round edge at the bottom, and it floated over and just completely blotted out the sky. But that wasn't the only one, Dr. Gilbert.
Yes. So as you can see in RPV, there have been 18 events, and in PVE, there have been 10, and a few in San Pedro, in Hermosa Beach, in Redondo Beach, and in Rolling Hills. Why does it matter? It matters far beyond UFOs. So that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, it's really important, and it's the reason we do it, because there are deep psychological reasons why there's a giggle factor associated with this problem, and that's an issue that we're going to confront directly.
So we're going to talk about the data on the phenomenon. We're going to show you the data.
Then we're going to be, like good scientists, we're going to talk about alternatives, and we're going to weigh the evidence, including
human errors,
natural phenomena,
spoofing and fakery,
advanced human tech that's secret,
non-human events,
and none of the above.
And then we're going to get into astrobiology, and we're going to talk about life in space, and we're going to show you that maybe interstellar space travel is viable, could be possible.
And the reason is that one of the things you hear about UFOs, they can't be true, the distances are too far, biological organisms can't survive space travel. We didn't know one way or another, so Dr. Chris here evaluated that really in depth. And then we're going to reach a conclusion and tell you what we think is happening.
So first, why does it matter? Well, here is the Pentagon, and as you see, they are laughing. There's a giggle factor because of UFOs. They think everything needs to be laughed off about, and nothing is true, nothing is real, but
what we found in the past is that when we giggle, we get in trouble. For example, in 1957, I think, we thought the Russians were really backward, and they beat us into space with Sputnik. We thought the Russians were really backward even still, and they beat us with a rocket torpedo that could go 300 miles an hour underwater. We thought the same of the Chinese, and they just came out with this hypersonic glide vehicle, of which we don't have it. Right? So we giggle at all sorts of things, and the thing I learned as an intelligence officer is you really do have to keep an open mind. I can't say what it was, but I saw an overhead image of a Chinese facility, and my jaw hit the floor when I saw what they'd done. And I thought, whoa, you really do have to keep an open mind about the art of the possible. So I have personally seen it in the intelligence world, that you really have to kind of dial down your prejudices and truly keep an open mind about things. And that's really why we thought UFOs were a great example to get that message across, because this is something that we believe serious scientists need to take a look at. So we've been kind of on a crusade to get hardcore scientists to look at it in an objective way.
So what is the belief versus what is reality? So we've got the known, what is known, and what is the unknown. So we think that we know so much. We think that what we know is so big, and it's almost as big as the unknown. But in reality, we know so little. What we know is so little, and what we don't know is so huge. It's what we think we know is dark matter, dark energy, but the unknown is tomorrow's dark matter, tomorrow's dark energy, and much more. It's huge.
That's right. In every epoch of human science, we think we know it all. And then we find out what we know is just a tiny fraction. And so we believe that actually if we drew that chart, there wouldn't be enough room in all of Palos Verdes to show what we don't know. We bring that up in the context of UFOs because it's possible that there's something we don't know we don't know. We know about dark energy, we know about dark matter, we know about black holes and things like that. But there are a lot of things we don't know, and it could be that some, at least, UFO phenomena fall into that. We don't even know that we don't know it. That's why we're talking about the known unknowns and the unknowns, you know?
So what about the data? What is the data?
Okay, so the Congress has been pushing on the Pentagon to take UFOs seriously, because a lot of their constituents have been pushing them to do it. And people like Marco Rubio and other people have said, look, you really got to do something about this. And Harry Reid from Nevada really got the whole thing started. The Pentagon, and I still have very close associates inside and in the intelligence community. And what they're telling me is, yeah, they've started the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office for Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, UAPs. They've renamed it. And so, you know, they have a whole office, they have a whole bureaucracy, and they completely don't take it seriously. It's still, the giggle factor is still there. They're doing it, but don't be fooled by what they're saying. So anyhow, this is what the Pentagon says officially about how they define it. And really what they're really saying when you boil it all down is there are thousands and thousands of reports that we've looked at, and there are a tiny percent that we don't have a clue. We honestly don't know what they are. We think they're real in the sense that it isn't one of the kinds of things we're going to talk about. It's something we don't understand. And that's a really important idea to keep in your head. There's something going on here. We don't know what it is, but we know what it isn't. It's nothing we understand.
Most often, they're between 5,000 feet and 35,000 feet. And then you see in commercial air traffic is about 35,000 feet. And we've got weather balloons that are about 100,000 feet. And most of the UAPs are seen about 20,000 feet. Now, what are their morphology? Most of them are orbs or round spheres, about 34%. And some other ones are lights, 30%. And the rest are much a smaller percentage. We've got Tic Tacs, 2%. We've got other ones that are square, polygonal, triangles, discs, cylinders, and ovals.
And so the cigar that you talked about fits into the cylinder/oval, and the lights also. So what you saw is not out of line with what other people have reported.
So what are the reported hotspots?
Well, mostly they're on the two coasts of the United States. A lot of them are near military bases where people don't know it's a military base, like where we were yesterday at China Lake, way north, kind of near Lone Pine. People don't know there's a naval base there, and there tend to be a lot of sightings around places like that. And also on the East Coast, a lot of them are over nuclear power plants. A lot of them are over naval facilities. And you see them in the Middle East, and you see them a lot in East Asia. Those are kind of the hot spots. Now, is that because that's where they are? Or is that because that's where people report them? We don't know, because there could be a sample bias here. So as scientists, we're not reaching any conclusions from this because the data were not collected really in a scientific manner.
So what are the 5 observables? What's special about UFOs?
The first is they start and stop on a dime. And the g-forces, for those of you who are familiar a little bit with physics, can be like up to 10,000 or 20,000 Gs. And just for reference, 9 Gs, if you sustain it for more than 10 seconds, could kill you, right? So we're talking about thousands of Gs, like the ones that were reported over San Diego in 2004 that went from space all the way down to the surface of the ocean in like 1 second. That was like 2,000 Gs.
Now, they have no visible engine or flight control surfaces.
Also, anti-gravity, by which the Pentagon means no visible means of propulsion to keep them aloft.
Now, they're transmedium travel. They can go from the ocean to in the air and then to space and then back into the air and back into the ocean very quickly. So they go from medium to medium. They don't care if it's water, air, or space.
Near Catalina, this is in the article, there have been quite a few sightings underwater. And then, of course, low observability, which is they come and you don't see them coming. You see them for a second, then they go and you don't see them going. So these are the Pentagon's 5 criteria for what they mean by a UAP, or what we're calling UFOs. Okay, so now we're going to get into the different alternatives. For those of you interested, I was on an A&E history show last year called Alien Files Reopened. And I was the science expert that was supposed to rigorously look at all these reports and render an opinion on what does physics say and so forth. And so what I did in that TV series and in our book is just kind of rigorously go through them all. And the first one we look at is like optical illusions. And what do we mean by that? So here you see one of the big sources of potential error is that you confuse near and far. Right, and I'll get into this a little bit later. But here, this person obviously isn't a giant. They're just standing much closer. But because of the focal plane is the same, they look like one is huge. And why does that matter for UFOs? Because if somebody throws a tennis ball right in front of your face, it looks like it's going really fast, right? It's like, whoo! But if you thought that tennis ball was 10 miles away and it went the same speed, how fast do you think it would be going? Like unimaginably fast. So right away, you have an explanation for hypervelocity and hyperacceleration. They just got the distance wrong. Right? It's just a lot closer than they thought. There's also an effect. Have any of you ever looked up at the stars and thought you saw like Venus or Jupiter moving around? That's called the autokinetic effect. And that has to do with the micro movements of your eyes, they call microsaccades, that in order for your whole world not to blank out by seeing the same image all the time, your eyes move a little teeny bit all the time. That's healthy. It's called micronystagmus, and that's what causes that. Also, you have perceptual errors like here someone's throwing a frisbee. Again, it's a distance confusion. And then you have things like the phi phenomena. You've all seen the neon sign where it animates and it goes, and you've all seen movies which are actually just still frames. And you just see one still frame after another, and your brain puts together the motion. So for example, if you wanted to fake a UFO, you could put up 5 balloons, and I asked my buddies at Disney where I worked, I said, you know, how would you fake this? And they say, well, we've done it. We put up drones, we had big long wires, we put big spheres, and we just lit them, and we just turned it on and off. Blink, 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 and it looked like the thing was going whoop, like that, right? So that's another example. The book has many more examples of a lot of different optical illusions that could create these kinds of effects. Natural phenomena, really, we're going to spend a little time on this because likely a number of the sightings are these things. This here, it's a little bit hard to see, but here you see the ocean and you see this container ship floating above the ocean. This is a real picture. So it's just floating there. It looks like anti-gravity, right? This is an optical phenomena called fata morgana. And those of you who know about science, there's refraction. It's the same refraction that makes your glasses work, except the atmosphere can refract the light and actually bend it so you can see over the horizon. Have any of you watched the sunset and watched that, wait, it hasn't set. It's set, but it hasn't set. It's sitting here for 10 minutes. How does that happen? Well, that's what you're seeing. Whenever the sun sets and it takes forever, it's already set, but you're just seeing it way over the horizon with a fata morgana. These are called sprites. You see them where there are ice crystals in the air with sunset or sunrise. You see them around the moon, or you see them around the sun. This is a ring cloud. That's actually a cloud. Here's another cloud. These are what's called ball lightning. We don't completely understand what they are. They're kind of like free air plasmas. These are called sprites. These are in the very highest upper atmosphere. And this just happened over Europe a few days ago. You know what this was? This was Elon Musk's booster over Europe, right? And then it isn't just visual. Some of the radar sightings there, just as you have refraction for visual, you also have refraction of radar waves that can make things that are over the horizon, like moving cars, look like they're up in the sky moving. And so again, in the book, we go through many, many other examples of natural phenomena. Let's now talk about advanced propulsion that somebody may be toying around with. And we know that, for example, and someone was asking me about Area 51, where I have worked actually when I was in the intelligence community. When I say worked, I went there on travel to do some things. And they do a lot of testing of different kind of aircraft. And there they test all kinds of interesting things like ramjets, scramjets. One of the things they worked on at Sandia at White Sands, by the way, we had someone from White Sands. This is a disc that's propelled through the air through a laser beam. In other words, you have a laser down here that's high power. It goes snap, 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 and it puts enough energy underneath this disc that it creates an explosion and a force, what's called photon pressure, and it pushes it up. So you can have levitation without any apparent source of engine. And so here you have this thing flying around. It has no engine at all, but it can fly like a UFO. In fact, kind of looks like a UFO. This is an ion engine. It doesn't put out any mass the way you think of it. It's just ions, charged ions that are sent out by strong electromagnets. This is a railgun, and these things can move really fast. In fact, some railguns can propel things into space. In the book, again, we talk about many, many other different kinds, and we point you to some websites where you can actually see examples of this, like the Air Force testing a device with 8 different rockets coming out at different angles, and they can make it move around any way they want, astonishingly fast. Now, as I said before, it's possible to fake this. Now, why would someone want to fake it? Well, at Disney, of course, that was our business. We were in the faking business to create an illusion. But someone else, you know, it's kind of interesting. In the intelligence world, we have this phenomena that the Russians had called maskirovka. And what it meant was fakery. Like, for example, that torpedo that I showed you, they had a version that went 600 miles an hour underwater. And we just happened to see it with the satellite on a very clear day over Lake Baikal. And they knew where our satellites were coming over, which was kind of curious. Why did they let us see it? Well, they let us see it because it wasn't exactly faked, but it was engineered. You know, they say you can walk on water by stepping on stones. And that's what they were doing. They wanted us to see it so we'd panic and spend a ton of money on stuff defending something that didn't really exist, right? So fakery and decoys and deception are very much part of the way the military does things. Because when you have an adversary, you maybe want them to think you can do things they don't know about. So they think twice about attacking you. right? Or they attack in the wrong place, you know. So there are a lot of reasons you might do this. This is the idea my Disney colleagues came up with, a little UAV here, a big sphere here. I can't go into this in too much detail, but in the military, there's this thing called electronic warfare, where you make ghosts and shadows and everything like that show up on radars and on other kinds of RF devices that just don't exist. And you make them do impossible things to confuse the adversary. This is something I worked on at Disney Imagineering when we found out that fireworks were an environmental problem. So we were going to do electronic fireworks indoors. And we got it to work. And the way it works is you have a super high power laser beam that literally turned the air into ball lightning, a plasma. And you can, with mirrors, move those around essentially instantaneously. So you see a moving orb or a light moving in the sky, and it's moving in impossible ways. It has zero mass, because it's really just a laser beam moving around like any of you have seen a laser show. And so you can create things like this, which we did. This is a shot from some work we did at Disney. So this is a way of faking it that could be done. And we found a Navy patent where they're doing this to spoof infrared missiles. So they'll actually draw the outline of an airplane maneuvering to draw the missile away from it. So the laser will be on the jet that's being shot at. So this is real. This is something that's actually being done right now. Another way to fake it, remember I said that you can confuse something small, close, for something big, far? Well, here you see it. If you're going to fake something like that, let's say here's your point of view, those and those look like they're the same size at the same distance, but if you look from the top, you see this one's small, close, this one's far. So if this one you thought was very far away, and it went zip like that, you go, oh my God, that's really fast, when it's not. So anyhow, it could be someone playing around, it could be someone intentionally faking, but there are all kinds of ways to fool the eye. Let's talk about a little more exotic. And I talk about this, there's a NASA program called NIAC. It's a NASA innovative, aggressive kind of concepts. And what they do is say, what does physics say isn't impossible? If it's not impossible, according to the laws of physics, we're going to put some money on it and see if we can do it. And my thinking is, if NASA is funding these things, maybe someone's doing them and that's what we're looking at. And so that's why I bring this up. But it also speaks to the issue where people say, well, it's impossible to travel interstellar distances in anyone's lifetime. And when you look at some of these propulsion systems, you go, well, I don't know, maybe it is possible. So there are all kinds of things like plasmas, where you can have a spaceship that's a cylinder and you have a source of a plasma, like I was saying with a laser, and photon pressure pushes it. You can have nuclear compression that generates a strong blast of gamma rays out the back that through photon pressure puts us at high accelerations. You can have a black hole or a neutron star and you can get a gravitational slingshot. Like when we send things to Mars, we send it to the moon and it's like it's falling to the moon, but it skips by and then it goes on off to Mars. So we get a gravitational pull. Well, if you do this off of something that's really massive, you can go really, really fast. And there are other ones, but this is kind of interesting. How many have heard of warp drive? Star Trek, Star Wars, where it goes, zoop. Well, you think, oh, that's science fiction-y. But you know what? NASA's funding it. And I won't go into all the technical details, afterward. If anyone's interested, I can describe the physics of it. But it all boils down to there's some really exotic physics with what they call negative energy, where it actually would be possible to travel faster than the speed of light by a lot. Because you're not moving within space-time, you're moving space-time itself. And we already know that space-time can expand faster than the speed of light because that's how the Big Bang happened. So let's talk about time travel. What if the UFOs that we're seeing aren't from any of the things I said? They're not atmospheric phenomena, they're not perceptual error, they're not someone trying to fake it, but they're not from outer space either. What if they're from Earth in our distant past or our distant future? Now you'd say, oh, okay, now that one deserves a giggle, right? How could there be time travel from the past? Well, we just wrote this book. It's a novel, The Shadow of Time, and that arose from our research into this issue. According to Einstein and the special theory of relativity, when you travel vanishingly close to the speed of light, time stops. And so when that happens, it's called time dilation. If you went vanishingly close to the speed of light, say you left Earth, say because of the Permian extinction 250 million years ago, and you were traveling just a tiny bit under the speed of light, which is theoretically possible, take a lot of energy, it's possible, You could come back 250 million years later, having only had 1 year pass your time. That is physically possible. And that's the whole premise for our book. You know, they left because of the Permian, and now they're back and they want to take the Earth back. And you're kind of in the way. So anyhow, this is time dilation, and it is technically possible. Now, this is a hard one. No one thought that traveling back in time was possible. Well, there's this thing called a CTC, a closed time-like curve. If you have a spinning black hole, right, that's doing what's called frame dragging, it's actually dragging the fabric of space and time with it, such that if you orbited one of these things, you would go in space and time and you would come back at the same place and the same time that you left. Again, this is not impossible, which means that we could have non-humans or humans or whatever our descendants are going to be doing something in the future from Earth, and they go to one of these things and they come back. So the UFOs that we're seeing are actually from our future or from our past, or maybe both. Now, is this likely? No. No, it isn't. But I think we want to go back to what we said originally. We have no idea, and believe me, I was inside the government with some of our sharpest minds. We know that there's something real. We don't have any idea what it is. So we have to be open to some really wacky things. Let's just look at what the possibilities are. And this is kind of the way a scientist would look at it. Let's say it's non-human, right? It could be terrestrial, meaning it's past to the future, or it could be extraterrestrial. Another tree here is, let's suppose it's extraterrestrial. We'll go down one more branch. The question is life beyond Earth possible? And could it get here interstellar distances? And we'll look at the physics, which we have with propulsion. And in a moment, Dr. Gilbert will talk about the astrobiology of space travel. Let me talk a little bit more about the physics. You've all heard about wormholes, right? Like if you have two black holes that are close together, you get a dimple in space-time, so you can short-circuit basically the fabric of space-time. And since space-time are one, if you travel a huge distance in space, you've traveled in time, right? So you could go way faster than the speed of light and get there if there were a wormhole. A black hole you could use as a gravitational slingshot, and then I already talked about warp drive. So these things are all extremely unlikely. But you know, you heard what Sherlock Holmes told Watson once? Watson, when you've eliminated the impossible, that which remains, however improbable, must be the truth. And that's why we're looking at some of these things, because our belief is it's something really weird, right? And there may not be any of these things, but it's something as weird as these things.
So let's talk about astrobiology. So if life outside the universe is possible, if there could be organisms that go from other places to Earth, what is it? So astrobiology is a scientific field that studies the origin and future of life in the universe. So what does it have? It has three main areas. The study of the origin and early evolution of life on Earth, but it's also the search for planetary biosignatures of past or present extraterrestrial life. And it's also the study of habitable environments in the solar system and beyond. So there are different parts of astrobiology. The first is there's different theories. The first one is abiogenesis. We're going to talk about it a little bit more. Or there could be the theory of panspermia. We're going to talk about this too. And if there is panspermia, then there could be organisms that are extremophiles. That's what we're going to talk afterwards about. And we'll talk about the signatures of life in space. But first, abiogenesis. What is abiogenesis? Well, it's a theory that says that the original evolution of life and living forms are from non-living matter. That happened like 3.8 billion years ago. So for that, there would need to be some phosphate groups that are not living, some sugars, some nitrogenous bases like adenine, uracil, guanine, cytosine, non-living also. All those will form nucleotides, and all those will form RNA, and we know that from RNA you can have living organisms. So that's the theory behind abiogenesis. Now, there is the theory behind panspermia. Panspermia, what is it? It's from the ancient Greek all, pan, which means all, and spermia, which means seed. So it's the hypothesis that life exists throughout the universe, but it's distributed by space dust, or meteoroids, or asteroids, or comets, or planetoids, or all of the above. They could also be spacecraft, our own spacecraft carrying unintentional or unintended contamination by microorganisms. So that theory argues that life did not originate on Earth, but instead it evolved from somewhere else and got seeded as we know it through a meteoroid or asteroid. So now, can journeys through space exist? If they exist, they need to resist intense radiation. They need to resist intense cold. There's so much harsh environment, a lot of G's, a lot of acceleration. How can they do that? Is that possible? Well, yes, it is possible. Here, we found some organisms that might survive long space journeys. They're called Deinococcus radiodurans. So, radiodurans, that's a bacterium that's an extremophile, and it can survive extreme cold, extreme radiation, extreme dehydration. It can survive in a vacuum of space. It can survive extreme acid medium. Therefore, it's known as polyextremophile. And those Deinococcus radiodurans are found to survive for more than 3 years in outer space. That's based on studies on the International Space Station. On the surface of the International Space Station, there are actually a bunch of organisms that can be found that resist intense radiation also. And now we have tardigrades. Aren't those cute little bears? So they're not extremophiles, but they're close to being extremophiles. They're from their size, from 0.5 millimeter to 1.2 millimeter. Very, very small, with 8 legs. And they're found on moss, fresh or seawater sediments, and they can sustain how many Gs? 16,000 Gs. So 16,000 times the force of gravity. When a human will be killed by a sustained exposure to how many Gs? 9 Gs. Very good. You did listen. Very good. Well, actually, in Top Gun, they were trying, they were going for 9 Gs, and it was very hard. So those little tardigrades, they can also survive 30 years at 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and they can survive 10 years in a dehydrated state. And NASA did an experiment where they survived 18 months in the vacuum of space outside the International Space Station. And there are also other ones like fruit flies. Did you know that fruit flies, those little teeny things, are surprisingly tough? They can withstand up to 17,000 times the force of gravity. And now we have even more. We have nematodes. Those are little roundworms, nematodes, that are found in a variety of habitats, including the soil and water. And some of us could have them inside our belly because they're parasites. They can grow also in animals, but they can grow inside of us too. And they are remarkably resistant to stress. They can survive. They can withstand up to 80,000 times the force of gravity. 80,000 times. When a human will be killed with 9 times. amazing. In 2023, it was reported that an individual nematode has been revived after 46,000 years in the Siberian permafrost. Amazing. And there is more. There is extremophiles at the bottom of the ocean. So, and they can be near hydrothermal vents. So how deep is the maximum depth of the ocean? Do you know? The maximum one is in the Mariana Trench. How deep is that? What's the maximum?
Like 30,000 feet.
30,000 feet? Anybody says a bit more?
Yeah,
35,000 feet? Well, we're counting in miles. In miles. There's 6.7 miles. 6.7 miles below the surface of the ocean, which is crushing the weight. I mean, if anybody has done scuba diving, the weight of the water is crushing. It would crush your bones to go at that level. Well, at 2 miles, we find those little ocean worms. Some of them would find it cute, some of them maybe not so cute, but those are near the Atlantic Ocean's hydrothermal vents, 2 miles below the ocean, but below the surface. But there are some fish that survive 5 miles below the surface of the ocean. And we don't understand why, because it would be that would crush your bones. It would crush anybody's bones. So why is this important? I'm talking about hydrothermal vents because not only are they hydrothermal vents inside the ocean, they are in the universe, and they are a lot on Enceladus, which is the moon of Saturn. So you see here the big rings of Saturn. This is Saturn. And then it's got a moon. It's right there. This moon is covered with ice. So it reflects the light really, really well. And it's got the temperature is about minus 300 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's got hydrothermal vents. Look at this. This is all hydrothermal vents, which is spectacular. There's like geysers. There are geyser-like jets that spew water vapor and ice particles from a subsurface of very salty ocean. We know that under the surface there is salt. There is an ocean, very salty. But in those jets, in what is spewed up, we have found phosphate. And when did I talk about phosphate before? I said phosphate is one of the building blocks of life. So there is phosphate there on Enceladus. And we also have found methane in the plumes. And what is methane? Methane is a chemical that is usually a product of life forms. So there might be life forms there, or there might have been life forms in the past, but they could still be. So that's why one of the next mission is to explore Enceladus and see what is in there. And there is more. There has been some dimethyl sulfoxide that has been found that's coming from Leo. And the Webb Space Telescope has found this. So it's from an exoplanet that is about 120 life years away from Earth, that constellation of Leo. And that dimethyl sulfoxide has been known to be a chemical, usually a product of life form. So there might be life out there in the universe. And also our new studies, because now we're using a lot of different telescopes that we combine with each other in different parts of the Earth, very potent telescope. We have found that there are trillions of planets in the universe, and potentially more than stars. So imagine all those planets, and then there is an estimated 2 trillion galaxies. So with all this huge universe, how can it be that there is no life? There probably is life somewhere out of the universe. And maybe it's a possibility that the UFOs that we see are coming from there. We don't know. Again, we don't know. But the scientists are more and more convinced that there has to be life outside of Earth, in the universe somewhere, probably very far away from us. So is long duration space travel viable? Yes, it is. We've seen the extreme dormancy of tardigrades. We've seen, I haven't talked about the extreme longevity of jellyfish. There are some kind of jellyfish that are basically biologically immortal. They can live forever. And we've seen the radiation resistance of the Deinococcus radiodurans, because we know there is intense radiation everywhere in space. So yes, space travel is viable with what we know now.
So now we're going to kind of take a 100,000-foot view of everything that we've talked about today, and we're going to look at all the possibilities. The first possibility is that they're not real, meaning you can come up with an explanation that's ordinary or pedestrian. And it could be some people, it isn't faking in the military deception sense, it's a hoax. People try to do these kinds of things for pranks or for publicity or whatever. It could be a misidentification because of perceptual error, natural phenomena, some kind of benign, quote-unquote, human activity. Or they could be real in the sense that there's really something going on.
Or they can be real. So if they're real, they can be either fakes, or they could be advanced, friendly technology, or they can be advanced, hostile technology, or they could be extraterrestrials, or they can be other, something else.
And we'll talk about that very shortly. But that's one thing you don't hear. You know, people come up with these kinds of possibilities, but we're thinking a little differently. And this comes out of a conversation I had with Marvin Minsky. Anybody know who he is? He was the father of artificial intelligence. He was a friend of mine. And once in one of these kind of philosophical bull sessions, I said, Marvin, are humans smart enough to ever understand nature to its full extent? And he said, no. It's as if you said, my cat is the smartest cat that I ever knew or heard of. I would someday teach French, and we're like that cat to the universe. And what is the cat saying?
So the cat says in French, la nuit, tous les chats sont gris. And Kimiko speaks French, right? What does that mean? And Rosemary speaks French. La nuit, tous les chats sont gris, which means, oh, and you speak French too. At night, all cats are gray.
And so are UFOs. Okay, so this is our next to last slide, and we want to kind of put things back in a 100,000-foot view. And, you know, I do this because we have to have humility to understand that we may be like that cat, or we may be like that nematode, or we may be like, you know, something even more primitive when it comes to the complexity of the universe. Here we look at what we know. Here's what we don't know, and then there may be, and I think there probably are, things that are unknowable. We're just like that cat. We're just never going to see it. And so we may be seeing some phenomena for which we all kind of accept sooner or later we're going to figure this thing out, even if it's aliens. Well, I say there's no reason that that's true. It may be that we're never going to figure it out because we're incapable of it. I hope that's not true, but if we're objective, we have to accept that it's true. And one way or another, though, as I said, there are tens of thousands of sightings, and the Pentagon has gone through all of them. And there are around 100 in that amount, like the Tic Tacs that they saw off the coast of San Diego and off the coast of Virginia. They're real. They captured them on video. They captured them on radar. They had humans looking at them. They have no idea what they are. And are they unknown? Are they unknowable? But either way, these weird things are hugely important.
But the unknowable, I don't like that. It's just depressing. So I want to be able to know and learn. So I think It's important for all of us to be aware of our surroundings. It's important to see what is happening. Every year, every month, every day, there are new discoveries. So let's all look and see, is there anything that could be different in our environment? Are you going to get up at, like, if you have a restless sleep, if you cannot sleep at night, if you get up at 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. and you look outside, are you going to see something that, oh, that doesn't make sense? That's strange. Pay attention to those things, because
Isaac Asimov, who, by the way, was a biochemist who had 250 science publications in addition to his novels, he said, science doesn't proceed with eureka, like, oh, I have this genius idea. It proceeds when you see something and you go, that's funny. And by any definition, these 100 or 200 sightings that are real, that we have no idea what they are, those qualify as a that's funny, and that qualifies and saying, look at me more closely, serious scientists, because there's some big advances just waiting to be discovered.
If you'd like to know more about our lecture schedule, you can check it out on Facebook at Lectures with Lianne. If there is an idea you have for a lecture or something that you think we should cover, please contact me at palosverdespulse@gmail.com. Please come and join us on the second Friday of the month at 4:00 p.m. at Fred Hess Community Park for another interesting, entertaining, and informative lecture with Lianne. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.